Terrified bear breaks into a house to escape wildfire. What homeowner does next is unbelievable. The first hints of autumn painted the San Gabriel Mountains in subtle golds and browns when Jake Dawson received the evacuation order. Standing on his wraparound porch, coffee mug growing cold in his weathered hands, he watched the morning light turn ominous as smoke began to obscure the familiar peaks. The Eaton Fire, they were calling it, a monster born of California's endless drought, now devouring the wilderness with terrifying speed. At 62, Jake had seen his share of wildfires in these mountains. But something about this one felt different. Perhaps it was the way the wind howled through the canyon with unusual ferocity, or how the typically bustling wildlife had fallen eerily silent. His nearest neighbor, Sarah Chun, had already packed her family into their SUV and headed for safety, leaving Jake alone on their quiet stretch of Altadena's northern edge. Just a few more minutes, he murmured to himself, methodically documenting his home's contents on his phone. Insurance purposes, he told himself, though deep down he knew it was more than that. Every photo captured a memory: the hand-carved mantle his late wife Catherine had insisted they install, the collection of wildlife photographs lining the hallway, the antique copper weather vane that had guided 3 generations of Dawsons through countless storms. The sharp blast of a police siren jolted him from his reverie. "Final warning, sir." The officer's voice crackled through a megaphone. "Fire's moving faster than predicted. You need to evacuate now." Jake nodded, pocketing his phone and taking one last look at the house. Catherine would have scolded him for lingering, but she'd also understand. They'd built this place together 30 years ago, choosing this remote spot for its proximity to the wilderness they both loved. Now a wildlife photographer by trade, Jake had spent decades documenting the delicate dance between civilization and nature along this mountainous frontier. As he drove down the winding road towards safety, the rearview mirror reflected an apocalyptic scene. Towering columns of smoke turned the morning sun into a baleful red eye, while emergency vehicles raced uphill with lights flashing. Jake's throat tightened as he spotted movement in the underbrush, desperate wildlife fleeing ahead of the flames. A family of deer bounded across the road, followed by a coyote too, terrified to give them a second glance. "God help them all," he whispered, pressing down on the accelerator. The evacuation center at Altadena Community Center buzzed with worried conversations and the constant updates of news broadcasts. Jake found himself surrounded by neighbors he knew only in passing, all united in their shared anxiety. Sarah Chin's young daughters, Emily and Lucy, had set up their coloring books at his table, their innocent chatter a welcome distraction from the grave-faced fire officials delivering hourly briefings. "The girls keep asking about the animals," Sarah confided, sliding into the seat beside him. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed sleepless nights. "I don't know what to tell them." Jake managed a gentle smile. "Tell them that animals are smarter than we sometimes give them credit for. They know how to survive." He didn't mention the scenes he'd witnessed during previous fires, the charred remains of creatures too slow or too unlucky to escape. Some truths were better left unspoken. Days blurred together in the evacuation center. Jake's phone became a lifeline to the outside world, constantly refreshing news updates and fire maps. The Eaton Fire had grown into a monster, consuming over 5,000 acres of wilderness. But finally, after a week of brutal battle, the firefighters gained the upper hand. A blessed combination of shifting winds and round-the-clock effort had saved most of the residential areas, though the forest would bear the scars for years to come. When the evacuation order lifted, Jake found himself among the first to return. The drive home felt surreal, familiar landmarks transformed by the fire's passage into an alien landscape. Blackened trees stood like sentinels against a gray sky, while patches of untouched green offered hopeful glimpses of nature's resilience. His property, miraculously, had survived largely intact. The fire had come within yards of the house, scorching the outer edges of his land before being turned back by firefighters. The air still carried the acrid smell of smoke, but beneath it, Jake detected the promising scent of rain. It was only after he'd done a thorough inspection of the house's exterior that he heard it, a low, rumbling sound coming from beneath the elevated foundation. At first, he dismissed it as settling timbers, or his imagination playing tricks. But as evening approached, the sounds became more distinct. Scratching, heavy breathing, and occasionally what could only be described as a whimper. Jake's first instinct was to call animal control, but something held him back. 3 decades of wildlife photography had taught him to trust his instincts around animals, and something about these sounds spoke of desperation rather than aggression. Instead, he set up one of his wildlife cameras near the house's crawl space entrance, making sure to give whatever was down there a wide berth. That night, unable to sleep, Jake reviewed the footage on his laptop. What he saw made his heart race. A massive black bear, easily 240 kilograms, had taken refuge under his house. The animal's fur was singed in places, and its movements suggested injury or exhaustion. Most striking was its behavior. None of the usual aggression or territoriality Jake associated with bears. This creature had the haunted look of a refugee. "You poor thing," Jake murmured, watching the bear curl into itself, trembling despite its impressive size. "You're as scared as the rest of us, aren't you?" Morning brought the expected visit from wildlife officials, alerted by concerned neighbors who'd spotted bear tracks in the area. Jake met them in his driveway, 2 rangers he knew from his photography work, Marcus Rodriguez and Emily Winters, along with a local veterinarian, Dr. Sarah Thompson. "We've got reports of several displaced bears," Marcus explained, reviewing the camera footage on Jake's phone. "The fire destroyed a lot of their habitat. Most are heading deeper into the mountains, but this one," he shook his head, "must have been too injured or disoriented to follow." Dr. Thompson frowned at the footage. Sedation would be risky in that confined space. If something goes wrong, we'd have no way to reach him quickly. And given his size, we'd need a significant dose. "What about waiting him out?" Jake suggested. "He's got to come out eventually." Emily nodded slowly. "We could set up a trap with food. Once he's out and in the open, we can assess his condition properly and relocate him if necessary." The plan seemed simple enough. Place irresistible bait, a roasted chicken, far enough from the house to give the bear room to maneuver, while setting up a humane trap nearby. But as hours stretched into a full day with no success, Jake began to worry. The bear's distress sounds continued, and the camera footage showed it barely moving from its corner under the house. That evening, as the wildlife team prepared to try again the next day, Jake made a decision that surprised even himself. "I'm staying with him tonight," he announced. "Something's not right. He's not just hiding. He's hurting." Dr. Thompson looked concerned. "Jake, I know you have experience with wildlife, but this is still a wild bear we're talking about. If he feels cornered, I'll stay in the house," Jake assured her. "But someone needs to monitor him, and I know every sound this old place makes. If something changes, I'll know." After the team left, Jake settled into his familiar armchair, photography equipment at the ready. The bear's presence below added a surreal element to the house's usual nighttime sounds. As darkness fell, Jake found himself talking softly, more to himself than the bear. "Catherine would have loved this, you know," he mused, checking the live feed from the crawl space camera. "She always said this house was meant to be a sanctuary." Guess she was right, even if she didn't expect quite such a large guest. The hours crept by. Jake dozed fitfully, waking at every unusual sound. Around midnight, a particularly loud whimper drew his attention to the camera feed. The bear had shifted position, and in the infrared light, Jake could clearly see what had been hidden before. A nasty burn along its right flank, explaining its reluctance to move. Dawn brought not just the wildlife team but also an unexpected visitor, Dr. James Morrison, a veterinary specialist in large predators who'd heard about the situation through professional channels. His presence added new urgency to the discussion. "Burns like that are prone to infection," he explained, reviewing the footage. "The longer we wait, the riskier it becomes for the bear. But we need to be smart about this. He's chosen this space because he feels safe there. Working against that instinct will only make things harder." It was Lucy Chun, of all people, who inadvertently provided the solution. She'd accompanied her mother Sarah on a wellness check to Jake's house, and her innocent question cut through the adult's complex planning. "Maybe the bear just needs to know it's safe to come out?" The comment sparked an idea in Jake's mind. "What if we're thinking about this wrong?" he said slowly. "We're trying to trap him, But what if we should be trying to help him trust us instead? Dr. Morrison looked intrigued. What are you suggesting? A gentler approach, Jake explained. Instead of a trap, we create a path to safety. Something that gives him control over the situation. The new plan took shape quickly. They would set up a series of food stations, starting near the crawl space and leading to a larger protected area they'd create using temporary fencing. Each station would offer not just food but also water and, critically, burn ointment mixed into honey. A trick Dr. Morrison had used successfully with injured wildlife before. It's risky, Marcus warned. We're talking about a lot more time and resources, with no guarantee of success. Jake stood firm. He chose my house for a reason. I think we owe him the chance to choose to trust us too. The next few days developed into a careful routine. Jake maintained his vigil, documenting the bears' gradual engagement with their offerings. The first day, it barely touched the food. But by the third day, trail cameras showed it venturing slightly further out each time, following their carefully planned path. Word spread through the community, and support began pouring in. Local restaurants donated food for the bait stations. Sarah Chin organized a schedule of volunteers to help monitor the cameras. Even the local media picked up the story, though Jake insisted they keep their distance to avoid spooking their nervous guest. The breakthrough came on the fourth night. Jake was reviewing camera footage when movement caught his eye. The bear had emerged fully from under the house for the first time, following their trail of food stations. But instead of rushing through them, it moved with surprising deliberation, stopping at each one as if following a ritual. "That's it," Jake whispered encouragingly to the screen. "You're almost there, big fellow." The bear reached the final station, now fully within the protected area they'd created. As Jake watched, it seemed to realize it had more space, turning in a slow circle before settling near a water source they'd provided. The burn on its flank was clearly visible, but thanks to the medicated honey, it looked less angry than before. Dr. Morrison, who'd been dozing in a nearby chair, stirred at Jake's excitement. "He's out. All the way out," Jake confirmed, "and looking more relaxed than I've seen him yet." The next phase of their plan went into action at first light. With the bear now in a more accessible space, Dr. Morrison could finally attempt treatment. The sedation process was tense. Too little medication would be dangerous for the team. Too much could be fatal for the bear. But years of experience guided the doctor's hand, and within minutes, the massive animal was safely unconscious. The examination revealed the full extent of the bear's ordeal. Beyond the visible burn, he had suffered smoke inhalation and minor cuts from his desperate flight from the fire. But remarkably, none of his injuries were life-threatening. The team worked efficiently, cleaning and treating the burns, administering antibiotics, and fitting him with a GPS tracker for future monitoring. "He's lucky," Dr. Morrison declared as they finished. "Another day or two without treatment, and that burn could have caused serious problems. But he should make a full recovery now." Jake watched as they prepared to transport the bear to a rehabilitation facility for further care. "How long before he can be released?" "A few weeks, probably," Dr. Morrison replied. "We'll want to make sure the burns are fully healed, and he's back to full strength. But after that, he can return to the wild." The bear's story captured hearts well beyond Altadena. Local news stations ran features about the gentle giant, who sought human help in his time of need. Wildlife organizations used the incident to highlight the impact of wildfires on animal populations and the importance of maintaining wildlife corridors in urban areas. For Jake, though, the most meaningful moment came 6 weeks later, when he joined the wildlife team for the bear's release. They'd chosen a spot deep in the Angeles National Forest, far from the fire's damage but still within the animal's natural range. As the transport cage door opened, the bear emerged cautiously, its fur now glossy and thick, the burned flank showing only faint scars. For a long moment, the bear stood at the cage's entrance, surveying its surroundings. Then, to everyone's surprise, it turned and looked directly at Jake. Their eyes met in what felt like a moment of mutual recognition, two beings who had shared an extraordinary experience. Then the bear turned away and lumbered into the forest, soon disappearing among the trees. That evening, Jake sat on his porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold remarkably similar to the day the fire had started. Sarah Chun and her daughters had joined him, making it a small celebration of sorts. "Will we ever see him again?" Lucy asked, her young face serious. Jake smiled, thinking of the GPS tracker that would help them monitor the bear's progress. "Maybe not up close," he said, "but he's out there, living the life he was meant to live. And sometimes, that's the best ending we can hope for." Later, alone in his house, Jake added the final photographs to his album. The bear emerging from sedation, its release into the forest, the last backward glance. Catherine would have loved these shots, he thought. They captured everything she had believed about this place, that it wasn't just a house on the edge of wilderness, but a meeting point between two worlds. The GPS updates over the following months told a story of success. The bear had established a new territory, far enough from human habitation to be safe, but close enough that Jake sometimes imagined he could sense its presence in the landscape. Other wildlife gradually returned to the fire-scarred areas as new growth emerged from the ashes, a testament to nature's resilience. Jake continued his wildlife photography, but with a new perspective. His images now seemed to capture not just the animals themselves, but the delicate balance between human and wild spaces, the unexpected moments of connection that reminded him of their shared vulnerability and strength. 1 year after the Eaton fire, Jake stood on his porch again, coffee mug in hand. The mountains had begun to heal, patches of green breaking through the fire's scars. A morning breeze carried the scent of renewal, and somewhere in the distance, a bear roamed free, carrying with it a story of trust, compassion, and the extraordinary capacity for understanding between species. Sarah Chan joined him, handing him a local newspaper featuring his latest wildlife photographs. "The girls still talk about him, you know," she said. "They call him the gentle giant, and make up stories about his adventures in the forest." Jake smiled, thinking of the GPS data he still regularly checked, showing the bear living a healthy, active life in its new territory. Maybe that's the real gift in all of this, he reflected. Not just helping one animal, but showing the next generation that there's always room for compassion, even in the wildest of circumstances. As if in response, a distant sound echoed through the canyon. Not the roar of approaching fire this time, but the peaceful morning calls of wildlife going about their daily routines. Jake lifted his camera, ready to capture whatever the day might bring, knowing that sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin in moments of crisis, when the lines between human and wild blur, and unexpected sanctuaries emerge in the midst of chaos.